Hey, what's up guys? I'm Josh and today we're going to be reviewing the Apos Caspian. First, I have a few quick, really actually important disclaimers that I want to make before we get into this video. One is that I am an Apos affiliate. Now with my normal reviews, they have sent out a lot of products to review. However, they're a storefront. They're just a third party. I have no contact with the manufacturers in almost every case of the audio products from Apos that I've reviewed. In this particular case though, they are the manufacturer, so that is important to know. Second disclaimer is, like always, and will forever be this way, no one is paying or asking me to say anything good or bad about this product. All thoughts and opinions are my own. Third disclaimer is that a while ago when this headphone was in pre-production, I was asked to give my feedback on what I thought this headphone should be, what it should sound like, what the build should be like, and I did give their feedback. I'll kind of call out some points where that's relevant to this review, but I do think it's worth knowing that in a sense, I was sort of in kind of the opinion field of the production of this headphone, though what this headphone is not what I advised. Fourth and last disclaimer, I'm sorry for so many disclaimers, but I think they're important in a video like this. This is Apos's first headphone. Any headphone company or any company that comes out with a first-time headphone, they get a certain amount of leeway from me, as long as their claims aren't completely outlandish, like the graphene headphone, for example, where they're really clearly not marketing to what I would consider to be a high standard. Unless it's those scenarios, I think any company coming out with a first gen product should be given a certain amount of leeway in the review because it's first gen. That doesn't mean buy it even if it's bad. That doesn't mean anything like that. It simply means that I'm not going to grade this as harshly as I would a headphone coming out of Sennheiser or Odyssey, for example. It's hard to make a headphone and it's almost impossible to come out of the gate with a perfect product. So I wouldn't expect that from any company, the Apos Caspian included. Okay, so let's talk about the build of this headphone. There's a couple things I want to talk about. So I will start with the good and then I'll go to the bad. The good news is that this is a pretty well-built headphone. This headphone does not feel cheaply put together or hastily crafted. It doesn't feel anything like that. It actually feels fairly substantial, but it's not heavy. It's a reasonably lightweight headphone. So you're not going to be getting a lot of wear like you would with a heavy planar, for example. This does utilize real wood. For me, this is kind of a downside. I actually specifically told them that I would not use wood at all in the design. They clearly chose otherwise, and that's okay. A lot of people do like wood. I'm not really one of them, but it could be an upside if you do like wood. I will say this though, there is kind of a glossy finish on the wood. I guess it depends on what you consider to look high end, but I kind of think this looks a little cheap. Again, just personal preference. Then you have the A on the Apos grills. The headband is reasonably well made, though a quick note on the headband, and this is kind of a downside. I'm pretty sure this is a HyperX headband, though I'm not sure if HyperX was actually the original manufacturer for this headband, or if this is just like a Alibaba type of headband or something. But yeah, this does not seem to be a completely unique to this headphone design, nor do the cups, nor do the pads. And I would assume neither are the drivers. Now, to be honest, I'm kind of inclined to list this as a downside, but it seems that most kind of beginning headphone companies are going this route. And if you've looked at creating your own headphone, this kind of seems like the smartest choice, is to buy some of these pre-made components and combine them into something. Unfortunately, it does leave a little bit of a, I don't know, it leaves it not feeling as special as it should, especially given the price tag that they're asking for this. The 4-pin XLR on the front, both right and left, is amazing. I love the angle at which it sits at. It's pretty forward, and it also has the connection buttons for the XLR cable itself facing outwards. It's like a really easy disconnect and reconnect, and the cable is actually fantastic. It's a single-ended cable, but they absolutely nailed the design. It doesn't hold kinks, it doesn't hold bends or anything like that. It feels really well built. It's great to use. I like it a lot. Now this also does come with its own carry case if you're into that. Okay, now let's get to the bad. Okay, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the wood. The pads are nice. They are, oval, which I think is a good choice. They are sort of big around and big top to bottom. I think really big ears may have a problem fitting inside this, but most ears like mine will not. The problem is that they are a little bit too shallow. So the driver kind of slightly rests against your ears. These pads definitely should have been deeper to get them completely off your ear. Though I think with a deeper pad, you would have had more bass than this already has. And I think you would have had to use a slightly different pad material to kind of mitigate that a little bit. So this slight discomfort doesn't seem like that big of a deal when you just first put it on, but after an hour or so, it gets pretty fatiguing and isn't really comfortable. As far as downsides of constructions, aside from personal preference on looks, that's about all the complaints I have. This thing does seem fairly well put together. It's got a couple oversights, but again, first gen, first headphone they've ever come up with, they're going to have small issues like this, and this is what I would expect. And I think the overall effort, though, was definitely a good one. Okay, sonically, bass is the best part of this headphone by far. Like, it takes a large step forward above all the other regions. Bass is very good on this headphone. It is very strong on this headphone, though. You are going to want this headphone if you are a bass head. If you are more of a person who focuses on mid-range or top end, this is not really going to be the correct headphone for you, in my opinion, at least. It's very strong. Fairly clear bass for how strong it is, but it's definitely very strong, especially below or kind of in that sub bass region. It hits pretty hard. Now there's a couple upsides to the sound signature. For certain music, like anything that's like Hans Zimmer-y, is going to be really awesome. The bass adds a level of epicness and grandness and weight to the music that thinner sounding headphones don't always add. It just sounds really awesome with the right paired music. It's pretty much tailor-made for something like Billie Eilish, something like Hans Zimmer, that has these kind of influential bass notes within the music that help kind of push the pace along on the song. This displays that very well. It's surprisingly relatively clear of bloat and bleed, and it doesn't seem like the bass response is influencing the mid-range or the high end. It seems to operate under its own kind of class and area, and doesn't seem to influence the other regions as much as some other headphones can. So bass response on here, while it's not technically precise, I think people who like bass will like this headphone because of it. The lower mid-range is actually pretty solid. The middle of the mid-range, kind of in between the lower mids and in between the upper mids, is a little bit low for me, and the upper mids are a little bit more forward. So you get basically 3 different styles of vocalists just depending on the artist. The first style, the lower mid-range people. These people actually hit with a decent amount of weight and a decent amount of quality to them. Anybody with a deep male vocalist is going to come across pretty nice on here. It's going to be pretty enjoyable, and it's going to be well separated from the music. You can also force really good separation out of this by picking music that was developed that way. Think like Sam Smith, Adele, any artist with a super heavy vocal emphasis in the music mix. This headphone is going to play just fine. It's going to sound really good. Mixes that are more focused on the upper vocalists, the upper range vocalists, they're not going to be great on this. It does come across often a little bit shouty, or sometimes even a little bit dull if they're hitting not quite the upper mids and not quite the lower mids and kind of occupying that middle territory. This can feel a little bit lost in kind of the sphere of all the other music happening around it. Now, I'll be honest here, at $200, the performance here is fine, but at like $500 that they're asking for, the vocal performance is just not up to par. Headphones like the HD6XX at a lot less do perform better than this headphone does. Treble response, I think a review of this is going to be based more on preference than actually technical analysis. Technically, it's a little bit dark, but people who like really bassy headphones like this offers don't usually want a super bright and clinical top end. Even though I feel like the details are good, they're just sometimes hard to extract because of how dark this headphone is up top. So the pairing of the slightly boosted lower mids and bass response and the darkness of the treble response, this headphone does come across pretty dang warm. So just be aware of that. Now, imaging and Soundstage. One of the things that I recommended that they do, probably the biggest important kind of main bulk description that I had for Apos on the sound, was a slightly warm headphone with sound staging. Now that is surprisingly hard to do. There are not a whole lot of headphones that occupy this space. Something like a Focal Alex is that. Something like an LCD2C is that. And a lot of other headphones that are very, very expensive can occupy this slightly warm, but with soundstage type of sound signature. So I thought if they could get that, but for cheaper, they'd have an absolute winner on their hands. Unfortunately, they don't have a lot of soundstage here. I think there's a couple things as to why. One, even though this is classified as an open back headphone, it doesn't really act like one. It doesn't really sound like one. When you put it on your head and you're listening to music and you cover the ear cups, it changes a little bit, but not nearly as much as it could. And they didn't really seem to take advantage of the fact that it was open back like a lot of other headphones can do. So you end up with this kind of really close, intimate sound, but you don't have this sort of more mid-range forward sound signature that I think those types of deliveries benefit from. So something like a 6XX is close sounding like this headphone is, but it's got this very vocal forward performance, and it's a little bit light in the treble response, a little bit light in the bass response, but it still sounds really, really good, and more importantly, really natural. This headphone unfortunately just doesn't extend very far in the sound staging areas. Now, the imaging though is really good. The imaging is genuinely very good. Things have a very specific placement in the field. It's just that the field itself is pretty compact. So let's talk about conclusions. This is a good headphone. This is a warm headphone. It's very warm focused, and that's what you're gonna get with this. A lot of bass response, a lot of focus in the lower mids. The bass, not a whole lot in the upper range, but there is a little bit there. But ultimately, it's a very warm headphone. And to be frank, this is a very good first headphone from a company. Like, if I produced this, I would be proud of the result if it were my company. However, ultimately, I do think the price is not justifiable. One, it's got a serious lack of Apos specific custom parts. It's not a very unique looking headphone. So like when I look at this, I don't see like the only place I could get it is Apos. Like I feel like I could pick something very similar up to this looks wise from a myriad of other companies. Two, the sound signature, while it is good, it really doesn't, in my opinion, compete at $500. You had the DT1990, you got the Sundara. Those are both the same price or cheaper. And then a little bit above, you have something like a Focal LX, which has insane sound for $600. However, that being said, if this thing drops in price a notable amount, I do think I would be recommending it for the right customers. It's also important to note, from my opinion at least, that this is one of the best first tries from a company or first products from a company going into a new product category. And it's so well done that I have the utmost confidence in what they will do in the future. Hopefully we can see something that is a little bit more custom and a little bit kind of better and more well-rounded in the sound signature. That would be very cool to see, and I think they have the capability of doing it. Okay guys, thanks a lot for watching. Till the next video, my name's Josh, signing off.